Over the last 4 episodes, we watched a handful of small wooden ships do something no one in history had ever managed. They felt their way down the long coast of Africa. They crossed an unknown ocean and stumbled into 2 unknown continents. They reached the riches of the East by sea, and then they sailed all the way around the entire planet. In the span of a single lifetime, the map of the world went from a terrifying blank to something whole. But opening the world was only the beginning of the story. The real story, the one that still shapes the world you and I live in right now, is what came next. It's the question we ended on last time: what human beings actually did with a connected planet. This is the final episode of our journey through the age of exploration. It isn't about one captain or one voyage. It's about the world all of those voyages built, in all of its wonder and all of its horror. Let's get into it. Here is the first thing you have to understand. The explorers we followed were not really looking for knowledge. They were looking for wealth and for souls, for God, gold, and glory. And the moment the routes were open, the people who came after them were not curious sailors. They were soldiers. They were merchants. They were men who saw whole new worlds and asked a single question: what can I take? The answer came first and most brutally in the Americas. Within a generation of Columbus, small bands of Spanish adventurers, the conquistadors, went looking for empires to plunder, and they found 2 of the greatest on earth. In 1519, a minor Spanish noble named Hernán Cortés landed on the coast of Mexico with a few hundred men, and marched inland against the Aztec Empire, a sophisticated civilization of millions with a capital, Tenochtitlan, larger and cleaner than almost any city in Europe. It should have been impossible. And in 2 years, it was over. The Aztec Empire was shattered, its capital in ruins, and a Spanish city was rising on top of it. A decade later, it happened again. Francisco Pizarro, with fewer than 200 men, marched into the Andes and brought down the Inca Empire, an even larger realm that stretched along the spine of South America. He captured its emperor, Atahualpa, in a single afternoon of ambush and slaughter. He filled a room with a fortune in gold and silver as ransom, the largest ransom ever paid, and then, once it was handed over, he killed the emperor anyway. These were not duels between equals. They were the violent dismantling of advanced, ancient civilizations with astronomy and engineering and roads and cities, by men who mostly wanted what they could carry. And it raises a question that has haunted people ever since. How do a few hundred men topple empires of millions? Part of the answer is steel, horses, guns, and ruthless cunning, alliances with peoples the Aztecs and Inca had themselves conquered. But the largest part of the answer is something the conquistadors didn't even understand they were carrying: disease. When those first ships crossed the Atlantic, they didn't just carry men and weapons. They carried smallpox, measles, influenza, diseases that had circulated in Europe, Asia, and Africa for thousands of years. The peoples of the Americas had been isolated from all of it. They had no immunity to any of it. And so, when these germs arrived, they didn't cause an outbreak. They caused an apocalypse. Wave after wave of epidemics swept through the Americas, often racing ahead of the Europeans themselves, killing people who had never even seen a white man. In community after community, it killed not 1 in 10, but half, 2/3, in some places as many as 9 in 10. Over the century that followed, the population of the Americas may have collapsed by something like 90%. Tens of millions of people. It is, by sheer numbers, one of the greatest catastrophes in the entire history of our species, and most of it happened invisibly, in villages whose names we will never know. This is the dark heart of what historians call the Columbian Exchange, the joining of 2 halves of the world that had been separate for 10,000 years. And it ran in both directions, with consequences nobody chose and nobody could control. Out of that catastrophe, the conquerors built an empire of almost unimaginable wealth. And the engine of that wealth was metal. Gold at first, but above all, silver. High in the Andes, in what is now Bolivia, the Spanish found a single mountain that was almost solid silver. They called it Potosi. Around it grew a city that, at its peak, was as large as London. perched at the freezing roof of the world, existing for one purpose only, to tear silver out of the rock. And someone had to do the tearing. With the native population collapsing, the Spanish turned to forced labor, a brutal system of rotational draft that sent thousands of Andean men down into the mountain in conditions that killed them in droves. Potosi made Spain the richest empire on earth, and it was built, quite literally, on a mountain that ate people. The silver that came out of that mountain did something brand new in history. It went everywhere. Spanish silver flowed across the Atlantic to Europe and across the Pacific on Spanish galleons, all the way to China, which had an almost bottomless appetite for it. For the first time, a single commodity tied together the economies of the entire globe. A coin minted in the Andes might end up in Madrid, or Amsterdam, or Beijing. This was the birth of something we now take completely for granted, a truly global economy, with the wealth of the new world pumping through the veins of the old. Stop and sit with how new that was. For all of human history up to this point, a farmer in China and a farmer in Peru lived in worlds that might as well have been different planets. Now their lives were tied together by an invisible thread of silver, the price of bread in one place quietly moving the price of cloth in the other. The modern feeling that everything is connected to everything else, that what happens on the far side of the world can land on your own doorstep, begins right here in the wake of these voyages. But there was still that problem of labor. Sugar, the new luxury crop that Europe could not get enough of, grew beautifully in the warm colonies of the Americas on vast plantations. It was punishing, deadly work, and the native peoples who might have done it were dying or dead. So the empires of Europe reached for another solution, and here we come to the darkest legacy of all. They turned to Africa. What followed was the transatlantic slave trade, the largest forced migration in human history. Over roughly 4 centuries, somewhere around 12.5 million African men, women, and children were chained, loaded onto ships, and carried across the Atlantic to be sold and worked, most of them to death, on the plantations of the New World. The crossing itself, the Middle Passage, is one of the most horrifying things human beings have ever done to other human beings. People were packed into the holds of ships in spaces too low to sit up in, shackled together for weeks in filth and darkness and disease. Around 1 in 7 did not survive the voyage at all. Nearly 2 million people died in the crossing alone, and were thrown into the same ocean our explorers had so proudly charted. I want to be careful and honest here, the way I've tried to be all through this series. This was not a side note to the age of exploration. The sugar, the silver, the colonies, and the slave trade were all one system, one economy, feeding each other. The same connected world that gave us global trade and a whole planet finally mapped, gave us slavery on an industrial scale. The wonder and the horror are not two separate stories. They are the same story, and that exchange remade the entire planet in ways so deep we mostly forget they ever happened. Think about food. Before Columbus, there were no tomatoes in Italy, no potatoes in Ireland, no chili peppers in India or Thailand, no corn in Africa. All of those crops are from the Americas, and they crossed the ocean and quietly transformed how the whole world eats. The potato alone, carried back to Europe, fed a population boom that reshaped the continent. In the other direction went wheat, sugar, coffee, and animals the Americas had never seen, horses, cattle, pigs, that transformed entire landscapes and ways of life. People moved too by choice and by force until the human map of the world was redrawn. Whole new peoples and cultures and languages came into being out of the collision, especially across Latin America, blends of European, African, and indigenous worlds that simply had not existed before. The world got a new population, a new diet, new religions spreading across oceans, and new ideas about who human beings even were. Because that's the last piece and maybe the heaviest. To justify what they were doing, to justify taking land and taking people, Europeans increasingly told themselves a story about hierarchy. About some peoples being naturally suited to rule, and others to be ruled, and others to be owned. The idea of dividing humanity into ranked races hardened, in this period, into something that would poison the centuries to come. Some of the ugliest ideas in human history were forged right here, as a convenient excuse for the wealth pouring home. But I don't want to leave you with the idea that the peoples on the receiving end of all this were simply passive, simply victims who vanished. They weren't. They resisted constantly and often. Indigenous nations fought the conquest for generations, and many never fully submitted at all. Enslaved Africans rose in revolt again and again, and across the Americas, those who escaped built free communities in the forests and mountains, hidden societies that defied the empires for decades. And whole cultures survived, adapted, and went on, woven quietly into the new world being forced upon them, in languages, in food, in music, in faith. The story of this age is not only a story of what was destroyed, it is also a story of who endured and how. Hold on to that. So let's try one last time to weigh it all. Because I don't think the answer is to simply tear the explorers down, any more than it is to put them on a pedestal. What the age of exploration did was real, and it was permanent. It connected a planet that had been divided since the dawn of humanity. It created the first truly global age, the first world economy, the first time you could, in principle, send a thing or an idea all the way around the Earth. Almost everything about the modern, connected, interdependent world we live in traces back to those creaking little ships. But it connected the world without ever making it equal. It built bridges, and then it ran them in one direction. The wealth flowed toward Europe. The suffering pooled in the Americas and in Africa. And the lines that drew who was rich and who was poor, which nations gave orders and which ones took them, are lines we are still living inside and still arguing about 500 years later. That's what I keep coming back to. When we look at a map of the modern world, the borders, the languages, the religions, the staggering inequalities between nations, we are looking at a photograph of something that was set in motion by these voyages. We are all, every one of us, living downstream of the age of exploration. And so our journey, this series, comes to an end. 5 episodes ago, we stood on a beach in Portugal and asked a simple question. Why would anyone sail off the edge of the known world? We followed them out past Cape Bojador into the unknown. We rounded Africa with da Gama and reached India. We crossed the Atlantic with Columbus into the greatest accident in history. We circled the entire globe with Magellan and his 18 broken survivors. And now we've watched the world they revealed become the world we inherited. In all its brilliance and all its blood. The map was made whole. The hard part, learning to live with each other on a single small planet, is a story that is still being written by us. But history doesn't stop, and neither will we. Because the world these voyages built, this world of vast empires, of kings grown impossibly rich on silver and sugar and stolen lives, was not as solid as it looked. Underneath all that gold, pressure was building. The very ideas the connected world set loose, ideas about liberty, about reason, about whether any human being has the right to rule another, were about to come back and shake those empires to their foundations. The enslaved would rise. Colonies would turn on the crowns that built them. Thrones that had stood for 1,000 years would topple in a single generation. The world made by explorers was about to be remade by revolution. That's where we're headed next, into the age of revolutions, when the world this series built caught fire. I really hope you'll join me for it. Thank you for sailing with me through the whole age of exploration. If these stories have meant something to you, subscribe and tell me in the comments, where in history should we go next? Until then, I'm Roarman, and this is where history comes alive, one story at a time. I'll see you on the next voyage.